So we have already initialized a new repository in this brand new Xamarin Forms project that we have just created in Visual Studio. And again, this is going to work exactly the same whether you're using Visual Studio on Windows 2019, 2017, or Visual Studio for Mac 2017 and 2019 again work in exactly the same way. Because at least for this section, we're going to be using the terminal, which is just going to be working exactly the same no matter where you run it. So the thing that we're going to do right now is finally commit all of those files that exist by default when we create the project. And I mentioned in the previous lecture how we created the repository, but nothing has been committed yet. No changes are being tracked. So in fact, if you run git status, you will be able to see that indeed there are no commits and there are a lot of untracked files because no file inside of the project, inside of the current directory, has been tracked yet. And you can see all of the files and all of the directories that are inside of the some test folder. In this case, just the .vs folder that is not necessary, but the solution and the folders to the 3 projects. So it is time for us to commit all of these files and even make a tiny change somewhere inside of our code to see exactly what is it that we have to do every time that we make some changes. So let's start from the beginning, from tracking all of these untracked files. And for this, all we really have to do is first stage them so we can later commit them. And to do that, all we have to do is run git add and a dot at the end. This dot at the end just means that we are going to be adding all of the files and all of the directories that have changed since the last commit that exist in the current directory. So that is what this dot means, the current directory. So if I execute this, all of these untracked files have just been added. And we can confirm that by running git status again. You now see how a long list of files that were there by default from the beginning have been added, have been staged. And you can indeed see how long this list is. So now that these files have been staged, the next step is to commit them. They are not yet inside of the source control system. They are not yet committed. We don't yet have that new version saved inside of the Git repository. For that, we have to execute git commit. And git commit is always going to require a message, which we can pass through the M flag and inside of the double quotes. Here, I am just going to write first commit. You know, we haven't made any changes. All of these files are really just the files that get created by default. So this is a good first commit. Simply execute this. And now all of those files that I added previously have been finally added to the Git repository. I finally have that first version of all of these files. And I can run git status again to verify. And you can see that there is nothing to commit. There aren't any changes that have been made since the last commit. So because a commit has been made, all of those changes that were pending are now saved. That first version is now saved inside of the Git repository. Now, of course, this is just the first commit. A commit with all of those default files that get created at the beginning when we create this Visual Studio project. Let's say that we come back to Visual Studio and we start coding our application. Perhaps we explore the app.xaml.cs. We see that there is a main page that is being initialized in here. And instead of the main page, I am just going to change a little bit how the code is being displayed in here. I am going to also, inside of the default stack layout, change this label. So instead of saying the default welcome to Xamarin Forms, I'm going to change the text to be some quick test. And these are going to be enough changes for Git to identify. Remember that these changes are going to be tracked line by line. So with these simple changes, nothing extraordinary happening in here, I'm going to, of course, save them right here from the IDE. and navigate back to the terminal. Let me just clear the terminal so this looks a little bit better. And if I run git status again, you're going to see that there are indeed some changes that have been made. Some files have been modified by Xamarin and Visual Studio in here, those that exist in the .vs folder. These are not important, these are just files that get automatically created and automatically modified. The one that we did change though is also included in here, the main page.xaml file. And indeed that is the one that we edited back in the IDE. So those changes that we have just made are not yet tracked by Git. The version that is tracked by Git is the previous one, the one that doesn't contain these changes. For us to include this second version of this file and the 3 others that are listed in here, I will have to run git add again. And in here I can specify a certain file, for example, some test main page. And with this code, only the main page.xaml file will be tracked, will be staged. If I want to add all 4 of them, I can use that dot that I mentioned previously. And finally, execute git commit again with a message. And the message in this case is just going to be change label text and execute the commit. And you can see that indeed 4 files changed, 21 insertions, 9 deletions. This just means line by line how many lines changed, how many lines were removed. And if we execute git status, we see that there is nothing to commit again. So there you have it. This is pretty much the flow that you're going to follow every single time you have some changes. The first one, we just added all of the default files that get created from the beginning. But this second time, we did something that we would do all the time. Every time we make an important change, you want to commit those changes in case you ever want to go back to that version. And you would do that exactly like this, by executing first git add, and then executing git commit. Now, before moving to the next lecture, where we're going to be creating different branches, because so far we haven't followed our own advice, we are doing everything inside of master, I want to show you how you can run git add and git commit inside of one single command. And I'm going to do another tiny change in here, maybe below the label. I am going to add some entry or something like that. Maybe set a placeholder. The changes in here are not really that important, but once I have something different inside of one file inside of this project, I will navigate back. Let me clear this again. And of course, see if I run git status, I am going to see that change being listed. And in this case, one other one that is being done by the IDE alone. But let's say that I want to both stage. Remember that I would have to run git add for that, and commit, which requires me to run git commit with the message. There is actually a short way in which I can do both at the same time. And that would be to run git commit, but instead of just passing the message, I can pass -am. The A meaning that I want to add these untracked files, all of them. All of the changes that have been made since the last commit have to be staged. That is what this A means in here, to add them, just like there is the git add command. And of course, still pass that message, which of course is being referred to by this M still like we are used to. And so inside of the double quotes, I'll just pass add entry to main page. Execute this, and you see how no errors are being thrown. The 2 files that changed were added, and they were also committed. And we can run git status again to double check, and indeed there are no changes, nothing to commit. The 2 files that changed were both added and committed with a message through one single command. So you can either run git add and then git commit, or you can run git commit and pass both A and M as these flags. So there you have it. This is how you commit changes to your Git repository directly from the terminal. In the next lecture, like I mentioned, we're going to be working with branches. Finally, we're going to create the dev branch and the test branch, because so far, we only have the master branch that gets created by default. But as I have mentioned before at the beginning of this section and in the previous one, we should always try and have at least those 3 branches: the dev branch, the test branch, and the default master branch.